Hello, everyone, and I hope you're all well. My name is Tanner Dagenais, and I'm the host of Self-Sabotage Solutions. On this podcast, it's my opportunity and my pleasure to be able to share all the information about self-sabotage that I know. And also, something I love to be able to do is just be able to share other people's self-sabotage stories, because it's so important that we know, no matter who we are, where we come from, what we've experienced in life, if we're a man or a woman, how old we are, we're all able to overcome self-sabotage. And so it's my pleasure to be able to have Steve Taylor here on the line. He's a trauma therapist. He has his own practice, private practice. And well, thank you so much for coming on this show, Steve. And we'll kind of have you introduce yourself here.
All right. Happy to be here with you, Tanner. So as you said, my name's Steve Taylor. I'm a father, a dad, a husband. I'm a therapist as well. And so I started out my career, I guess kind of the main first professional role, I guess, was an addiction counselor. So like many addiction counselors, I had my own kind of battle with addiction. And so I'll talk more about that. And kind of through the course of my personal recovery, was able to kind of finish my degree, get a master's, and go into addiction counseling. And then kind of from there, I've branched out a little bit into some more general mental health counseling and therapy. And as of now, I'm kind of most excited about doing, which is kind of a buzzword these days in the self-help realm, but working with people's trauma, because essentially that, in my opinion, is at the root of not only most all mental health or what we call mental health conditions, but also, physical health conditions, the lifestyle we play, all about this. So I work in private practice out on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So right on the beach. Love it out where I am. Gets real busy this time of year. So out here on the quiet lake in Minnesota for the 4th of July, which is nice. But so I just do kind of individual trauma work with people in a private practice setting.
Awesome. Yeah, the trauma work is so important. I know for me, addressing my trauma was extremely important for me to be able to overcome, the self-sabotage I was facing in my life, and, my own addictions and my own, I guess, self-doubts and all that. So I know exactly how important it is, and it's fantastic you're able to help people with that. I'm so excited to be able to hear your story. So, I know you're talking about like the addiction and everything. So when did that all start? What kind of got you into helping other people and, knowing you needed help yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, there's a few kind of different ways to come at that question. And it's, I'm probably going to answer it differently today than I would have maybe 12 years ago. But, it's like, where did my addiction start? Well, you could say, like, how far back do we want to go? Yeah. How far down the family line did alcoholism run? I think pretty far. Right. When I look at my family tree, you shake it, there's going to be a lot of alcoholics that fall out of that tree. So it goes way back on both sides there. But kind of in, how it touched me, I guess growing up, I always felt this sense of disconnection. So, you'll hear a lot of people in kind of 12-step circles talk about how they never really felt comfortable in their own skin. So, maybe people would call that social anxiety. I kind of looked at it. I look at it now as that I had a lot of kind of sympathetic activation in my body, right? So kind of like feeling on edge, my feeling a pit in my stomach. Oftentimes my hands were clammy, and so when I found alcohol at a young age, it felt like I could like breathe, like I could take an exhale, right? Like it wasn't just a beverage that made me feel kind of happy. It kind of was a spiritual awakening in a way, and that might seem over the top for some people, but for people that eventually get themselves addicted to drugs and alcohol, and I kind of have this philosophy that there's people that can, and it's just reality, I think, but a lot of people can develop an addiction slowly over time. At some point, they kind of cross this line where the habit becomes a deeply ingrained addiction. And then I think there's also the person that from the first time they tried it as a teenager, drugs and alcohol was really filling a God-sized hole, and so I think for people that have, some more childhood trauma, it's just that the substances work that much better at treating it. And so they become that much more powerfully addicted at a young age. And so, just like, I don't think any of us really get out of childhood without getting some wounding. Mm-hmm. But, so my particular manifestation of that, right, was, as I look back now, there was some stress during my mother's pregnancy, right? And so we know that if mom's, got a lot of cortisol pumping through her body, having a real stress pregnancy, how epigenetically that can get passed along. And so I had some of that. I had, like many boys, that happens in our country without their consent. I was circumcised.
Right.
Yep. So that is a major physical trauma at an early age, right? And it's funny, I was just a few weeks ago, did some healing work around that, right? Where I actually kind of somatically felt that. And that's a long story. But so early, trauma with that. And then, growing up, like I think in my mom's family and probably my dad's family tree at some point, but, there was addiction within the family. So my dad drank, and kind of hid his drinking, was kind of a sneaky drinker, kind of what we would call a functional alcoholic. So there was that kind of vibration of addiction and kind of lack of emotional expression and interaction, right? Dad, was never physically abusive or things like that. But when you're drinking, you can only be so present and engaged, right? And so had that, and mom had some anxiety, and some various things happen in childhood, right? Some sexual experiences that I had at a young age that I carried a lot of shame around, that I think a lot of men, something we don't talk about as men is we don't talk about circumcision and the brutality of that, and that what happened to us and what we do to our boys. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about men, the prevalency of boys getting molested. We're starting to talk more about that, but that's really common. And then even at a really young age, having like a same-sex experience, being curious about that, and then carrying so much shame thinking you were gay when you were just, a kid exploring. So some of that. And then when I found alcohol, I fell in love with it. Right. So high school, alcohol, smoking weed, so smoking weed every day and then drinking on the weekends. That progresses from the weekends till you get to college. Now it's socially acceptable in college to drink on Thursdays. Right. Yeah. So now it's Thirsty Thursday. Right. So now I'm drinking Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm holding it together in the fall and the winter enough, holding it together in heavy air quotes here, basically staying academically eligible so I can play basketball. And then, so my pattern was from 18 to 22, hold it together enough to play basketball, fall off the deep end into depression, Got to the point where I was suicidal, and then holding it together enough to play basketball in the fall. And then when that was over, had even less purpose or identity, right? So now all I have is alcohol, and drink myself into, being suicidal. I think if you would have taken the alcohol away from me at that point and having no solution, I would have had pretty serious, just hopelessness, meaninglessness, no sense of purpose. A lot of that repressed emotion and trauma just kind of needing to come out. But then when you're drinking every day, alcohol itself is such a depressant that it really like exacerbated that. And I was thinking about ways to end my life. At 23, my life really never got off the ground, so I kind of joke about that. Like, I never got a chance to burn my life down to the ground because it never got off the ground. But so, I was given what I think a lot of people like we talk about hitting bottom, right? Or, the phrase that I like is that I was given the gift of desperation. And so I, asked for some help one day. I woke up one morning and had done one of those things that I promised myself I would never do. Right. So it's like most people change their behaviors to meet their values or their expectations of themselves. And I would just constantly lower my expectations or lower my standards so that my behavior didn't have to change. So my behavior, the feelings were just unacceptable, a lot of shame, asked for help, and got myself into treatment. So I had to go to treatment a couple of times, a residential, what we would think about as rehab. And then it stuck. And something kind of shifted inside of me, to where I really wanted, alcohol beat me up, where I would just had enough of it. And then I was willing to kind of do what they were presenting to me. So I kind of went what would be, I guess, the traditional model of recovery, which is the 12 steps. And that really helped me, like, kind of take a honest look at my reality. Like, can you control your alcohol use? And the reality was no. Like, I was not the person that was able to have one or two drinks and be satisfied with that. I was honestly never interested in that, because I wasn't drinking to just kind of relax or engage socially. I was drinking to treat an internal discomfort, right? I was, drinking to treat, trying to solve an internal problem with alcohol. So the 12 steps really, really helped me to get connected with some men that had drank like I did, felt like I did, and now they didn't, and they were leading happy lives. And the thing about AA and 12-step meetings is you can find successful people. And I define successful meaning that they're sober, that they're in recovery, and they're happy at the same time.
Right.
Because that's the trick, right? You can find a lot of people in the rooms of recovery, in the 12-step rooms, that are technically sober, right? Maybe they haven't had a drink in 25 years, but they're not too physically healthy, or maybe they, have no relationship with their kids, or, they're in a job that they hate. And so, but I found some people that were like sober, happy, thriving, like, and so I just kind of learned to do what they did. And the biggest things that they taught me were, be of service, get out of yourself. You don't like the way you feel, help somebody else. Right. And really get into action, so some of the things that I learned were like, take a look at yourself, like, clean up your past. Where have you screwed people over? Like, make it right. I think that's like what's so powerful about the 12 steps is like, you do this, like, work on yourself where you're looking at like, can I really control and enjoy using substances? Well, no, right? Have I been able to make that change happen on my own? Well, I hadn't been, right? So I need some help. I needed, a power greater than myself, which was initial. I've come a long ways around spirituality and God, I mean, that could be a whole podcast, but, initially it was, okay, I can't do this on my own. I need some help. So I'm willing to do what you guys, do to stay sober. And then it was a matter of really looking at my fears, looking at where I was carrying resentment, where I had anger towards people. Where was I afraid? What were the things that I was ashamed about? Really taking a hard look at those, asking for some help to change them. And then going back and making amends where I had hurt people, with my family, with girls that I dated, with places that I stole from, really making all those uncomfortable amends. Like, I hurt you, and what can I do to make this right? And then trying to help other people. So from there, that took away my desire to drink alcohol, and kind of was my first experience of like starting to feel comfortable with myself and like myself a little bit more, right. Which was like a foreign thing for me, right? Like, I'm so uncomfortable just being my authentic self that I have to be drunk to interact. I've got to be drunk to have the confidence to, be with a girl or, all of it. So AA taught me how to like not drink, start to like myself, start to help other people. So I got into counseling from there, got into addiction counseling, finished my undergraduate degree and moved from Oregon to Minnesota. Went through a training program there, became a counselor, and started working in treatment centers. Did that from 2012 to about 2020. And that was great. That was great work. I learned so much. And then when my daughter was born in 2018, I started kind of being more called into private practice. Was getting a little burned out on the just the treatment model that I was working in. And, as you know, Tanner, when you have a child born, I think at least for me, maybe you relate to this, but it kind of shifted something in me a little bit, right? Where it's like, okay, now I'm really focused on my responsibilities, right? Like looking at what do my finances really look like? Like with my career, like, it just had me thinking more about my future and being a solid provider. And so I think that combined with feeling some burnout in the job that I was working, I started a private practice on the side. And so that's just a different level of care, right? What I was working with before were people's addictions are so severe that they need to be removed from their home because it's going to be physically unsafe for them to stop using substances. They need to be physically removed from their environment to get started. So I went from that to, seeing people who are kind of still in their day-to-day life and coming to my therapy office. So went into that, started pussyfooting around with that in 2019. And I say pussyfooting around because I probably wanted to jump into it full time a year before I actually did. And so part of that was, big, there was a real part of that where I needed to have some ducks in a row, right? I needed to at least have some clients before I make the full-time transition, right? But another part of that was a self-sabotage mentality, just like a fear-based mentality, a scarcity mentality around that I'm not going to have enough clients. And so the pandemic really helped me with, it gave me a hard nudge to do that, because where I was working, she put us on hold. We went on hiatus, right? And so I wasn't going to get, apply for unemployment. I have this part-time practice where I've got a few clients on the side. So I just went into it full-time at that point, and have loved it. And looking back, kind of wishing I would have told my younger self to do it, much earlier. But I learned the lessons, that I needed to learn along the way. Then, and the timing's been great. So yeah. And I guess, is there anything that you wanted to comment on before I feel like I'm going to make a shift here, but anything with all of that?
Yeah. I mean, it was very relatable. I think a lot of people, feel like they need alcohol to help fill like a void in themselves, or because they don't feel like they're enough. Like that's a really big belief, and that's why I have this written above me, and for everyone on the podcast, I have like on my whiteboard behind me, it says I am enough, because it was so important for me to believe that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's awesome, and it's so inspirational, and I think a lot of people just can probably relate to exactly what you were talking about, that feeling of, and maybe they're not full on alcoholics or, addicted to something, but they still have that feeling. I think most people do, on some level, that they just don't feel like they're enough. So it's really good points you were talking about as well, with like the men and, the circumcision and, all the points along with like the men-to-men contact when they're, or boy-to-boy contact when they're young, and feel like they might be gay and kind of hiding it. And I think that a lot of people have went through those experiences as well. So thank you so much for sharing the story. But where are you going from here? I'm very interested.
Yeah, so I guess what I would say would be, one thing that happened in 2020 for me was really, what I would describe as like a second waking up. And so like in 2009, I woke up to, what I was doing, the self-destruction with the addiction. Right. And so and then in 2020, I had another waking up in sobriety, of like, just all of the other areas where I'm still self-sabotaging, or, I have active addiction kind of tendencies. Right. So, for me, it was like, I'm eating candy like every day. Right. Like I'm going to work. Right. I'm not really happy in my job. Right. Like, I'm not making more money each year and feeling more and more fulfilled in my job. I'm just coasting in my job. I'm stopping at the gas station and eating a bunch of candy on the drive home. Right. I'm not really, feeling fulfilled. Right. Like I'm working out a little bit, but not really. I'm not really meditating or growing spiritually. I'm just coasting, so I had just like a wake up call, and, I think, found, I see, you got the Paul Chek book back there. Yeah. So I found some people like Paul Chek and Jason Christoff and just some guys that were talking about health and spirituality in kind of a different way. And so, that just inspired me to do some different things. And one of the things that's been big with this kind of second awakening, and it's kind of controversial in the recovery community, is working with, various plant medicines or psychedelics. And so I took that, I took a foray into that area very consciously, very intentionally, because of my history and my tendency to give me the outside thing that is going to make me feel better, right? And so the psychedelics, I think, while they are very powerful in, I think that they've really been raising people's consciousness, and they give you just like a perspective shift, right? So you start to see some things differently. And so in 2020, after, talking very openly with my wife and with some people that I trust, I consciously did some work with psilocybin mushrooms. And that really kind of shifted me, shifted my perspective, some reorganization going on internally. And that really helped solidify some changes that I was making in my diet, and really, cutting out sugar, getting a lot more just nutrient dense food into my body, how much that affected my clarity and sense of well-being, mental health, and then just kind of got really inspired as far as a shift into like what my purpose is here, which really just kind of was crystallized for me, like, helping to work with people to resolve, not just gain conscious or intellectual awareness of, but to experience and come to peace with and resolve the trauma, or kind of the unprocessed stress physiology in their bodies. And so I've really kind of just been really excited about that, and have done a lot of inner work these last 2 or 3 years, trying to resolve as much of my own as humanly possible. Because the more that is within me, the less effective I'm going to be with the people that I'm interacting with, right? Like if my system or my nervous system is in kind of dysregulation, then I'm not going to be able to help somebody to regulate theirs. And so, yeah, that's just been like a great piece that's come over these last couple of years to kind of like hone in on really, what the purpose is here, to do that with my clients. And then of course, with my children, and that's another interesting piece that has come up. Like, I think that when we have kids, they tend to kind of trigger or show us in them what we still have unresolved in us. And so that's been, an exciting and challenging thing to see, like with my 4-year-old, and then with this infant, Alara, these last 7 months, just really bringing that stuff to the surface. So yeah, I'll kind of pause there.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I think it's so important to be able to address those things for our kids. And it's a really cool point you make, that, you can see that within your kids, because, I think that's where we kind of got a lot of our, sometimes, we got like a lot of our trauma from our parents, or from just society in general. But yeah, it's really cool you were talking about the psychedelics. I know I've done mushrooms a couple of times. It was probably not really in the same kind of light that you did it in. It was more kind of like a party, party mode, kind of like, let's go have a trip. But I still think that was a very interesting experience for me. Have you also looked into doing I know the mushrooms is one part. You also look at like the DMT, or like the euthanasia, I think it is called, where you go like into
ayahuasca.
Yeah, ayahuasca. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. I've worked with ayahuasca as well, and I think what I'm and actually kind of what I'm most excited about is recently I did a training, and I'm doing some apprenticeship with the Psychedelics Somatic Institute. And so the way that they work with these medicines is really kind of starting with the body. And, as a former active addict, I can tell you that there's a lot of us that have the mentality like, let me take the medicine and just, like have it open up my third eye and let's blast interdimensionally and realize that I'm, a light being expression of the divine, which is all true and all good. But what's important, I think, is to kind of resolve, like start at the root chakra, right? Like let's start at the body, and try to get at the kind of stress energy, right? Or the stuff that we've dissociated out of our consciousness. Let's start with processing that. And then once we've resolved the trauma of our biographical life, now let's go to the spirit realms, because I think what can be a trap for people is I don't want to go back into my body, right? Because that's what's so uncomfortable, and that's what I want to escape. Or I don't want to go back to the biographical trauma of my life. I just want to take and do this passive treatment where I can take the psychedelic and have my mind blown. And there's a time for that. But I think that for me, it's, let's start with that's why I like the somatic approach. And because when we bring awareness to our body and really feel all of the impulses and the movements that the body wanted to do when we couldn't escape the trauma, and now all of that stress physiology is stuck in our body because it never got to fully express. And what I'm so excited about with the psychedelics is that what they seem to do is kind of turn off the default mode network, or that part of our brain that wants us to stay in our head. And it allows us, they can be a really powerful tool to allow us to get into the body, into the autonomic nervous system, which naturally it wants to go back to homeostasis. It wants us to process out that stuff that's stuck in our body, but our conscious mind shuts it down. And so what I'm excited about with psychedelics is, again, just using them as a tool to make our way into the body and to process that stuff. And then I'm a huge fan too. Yeah. Like once we've done that, once we're grounded, once we've got a comfort in our nervous system to be able to know that I can feel these intense emotions and they can move their way through me.
Right.
Now let's go to the powerful spirit molecules like ayahuasca or DMT or even high dose psilocybin. So that's kind of what I'm excited about. And it's kind of funny, like my experience with the things like psilocybin or ayahuasca, even LSD, they have been very somatic for me. I tend to not go to the visuals or the spirit realm as much as maybe some other people. But for me, they've been really somatic. So like I've had an experience where I kind of re-experienced my birth, which may seem a little strange, but if you look into Stan Grof's work, a lot of people have that experience with LSD. But I've kind of, in a way, kind of processed some birth trauma as well. And then and the circumcision was something that somatically my system was able to kind of go there when we shut down the conscious mind and get into the body through the somatic therapy. That's probably the most intense experience that I've had doing this work, but it was very beneficial. I felt very kind of embodied afterwards. And also just with a really visceral sense and a really clear sense of kind of just the unconscious suffering that we're perpetuating through that ritual of circumcising our boys unconsciously. Because I would venture to say that 95% of people are kind of doing that unconsciously with their children and not for specific religious purposes. I think there are people that do that, but I think mostly in our culture, it's just an unconscious thing that we do, and we don't realize, that infant has been in the womb all this time, these 9 months with the mother, safe, secure, hearing her voice, being connected.
Right.
And then to go through that intense experience of being disconnected, being pushed through into life, and then shortly thereafter to be taken away to a cold environment and usually without anesthetic, be cut, and then not soothed by the mother in that moment. They bring it's kind of crazy when you look at what we're doing there, for no health reason, no legitimate health reason.
I completely agree with that. Yeah. I know we didn't do that with our son. We definitely avoided the circumcision, and thankfully my parents did the same for me. So definitely very, very lucky to have not gone through that myself. But I know how impactful it can be because I was doing a lot of research into it. But something you were talking about with psychedelics, and thanks for sharing that information, by the way, it was super cool and super fascinating. But I know you were talking about how like a lot of people just want to go straight to the, and I think that's kind of like people just kind of want to skip like the work, right, and go straight to that experience. And I think that's kind of way our like society set up with like the short term instant gratification kind of thing. So it's not really surprising that a lot of people want to just go straight there, to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, because I know a lot of self-sabotage kind of comes from that short term, instant gratification kind of thing. Like instead of doing the work, addressing the traumas or something, right? They reach out for the alcohol, and sometimes maybe it's because we don't know how to do it, kind of like in your situation or a lot of our situations. But if we would actually stop and slow down and think long term, like how is this going to affect me? Is this going to address the situation now, or is it just going to keep repressing it until later and later on until it builds up? But yeah, I think that's so important to address. So important to address. Then something I've been I'm interested in. I know you were talking about how you were like eating a lot of candy, and things like that. How has your relationship with food changed? I know for me, like in my growing experience, like I used to eat very unhealthy. I was healthier than most people, but at the same time I still think it was pretty unhealthy at the time. But now, once I've made those changes, I've noticed a huge difference in my life. How has your experience with food changed, and have you noticed any big changes with that as well?
Yeah. So there's been a lot there. One of the things was just having the conscious awareness of like, I'm putting this into my body, and like just how disconnected I was from that reality, right? Like, or just thinking of it that way, right? Because it's like I was just such a slave to the impulse, right? And at one point, my gut is so impacted, right, that it's just like it's craving. There's like there's like a physiological, like, whatever's in there, candida or whatever's in there, like craving the sugar. But one of the things was just like looking at it from the perspective of like eating as an act of self-love. Like, right. And like, how can I say I love myself, or how can I, like when I'm abusing my body, and like the body is really, sacred in a way, and kind of like but we separate that from ourselves, right? Like we're so disembodied that I have no connection that of what I'm putting into my body or what I'm saying to myself. Like, I think all of this like really stems from that disconnection. So that's been one thing. And, then, on a practical level, it really started with like, using the juicer that we had for so long that just sat in that, like, I think Jason, somebody that we both look up to, talks about that exercise equipment that's being used as a coat hanger, right? It was ours, like the juicer that was just being used as a, space taker in the cabinet. But just introducing, some of that, just starting with drinking a juice each day and not buying candy, right? If I can just not buy candy and drink some veggie juice, right? And throw an apple in with the veggie juice, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, because that's another thing that in the black and white thinking, like I can be really rigid. I can get really obsessive about stuff. I can get, now I'm the health nut, and now I'm just as rigid about what I'm eating as I was disconnected from what I'm eating. Right. So for me, it's been at times, there was a time when it was really, really rigid, and now it's more so like healthy. But, I got to watch myself, because I can be just as, negative. The negative self-talk can come in around, I'm not doing health perfectly, but yeah, food's been huge, like impact on my energy levels, my clarity. If I'm eating garbage, I'm going to feel bad, but I'm also going to be a shitty dad, because I'm not going to have energy for my 4-year-old. And she takes a lot of energy to keep up with, she wants to play all day, as she should,
Awesome.
So yeah, we have a duty to take care of ourselves, I mean, that's another mindset that is kind of weird when you take a step back and look at it. Like, I'll do anything for my kids, right? But will I feed them healthy food? Am I willing to be a healthy example for them, so it actually, any of this works? Because if I'm not living it, it doesn't matter. Like, am I willing to do that?
That's awesome. I love the way you phrased it, how like, you gotta, is like a act of self-love, like eating the food, is that showing your self-love? Because I like a lot of people just think of it as like food for pleasure. We kind of like lost sight of the fact that we're eating to nourish our bodies and to give ourselves the energy and the nutrients that we need, so that we can function correctly and be able to perform our daily actions and move forward in life. Because if we're not giving ourselves that, then we are self-sabotaging ourselves and leaving ourselves in a state of low energy. And just often, I think a lot of people also don't realize that like your body and your mind are so connected. So when you eat that crap, your mind also gets affected. And I think a lot of people have like depression and a lot of mind problems or mental problems because of what they're eating as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Things like brain fog can just clear up by just eliminating crap,
Then one other thing I was interested about, I know for me, it was super important for me, was self-talk, like how I talk to myself, like tell myself I was bad at something. Specifically for me, it was a lot of just like doubting myself and telling myself I wasn't good enough. Like if you would have asked me like 5 years ago if I would have been on a podcast interviewing someone or just sharing information with people, I'd be like, no way. Like I suck at public speaking. I hate it. I'm not good at it. And so, I would beat myself down and kind of abuse myself that way. Did you experience a lot of that in your life? And what was that changing it around, and how important was that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've definitely experienced that a lot. It pops up from time to time still. I feel like if it doesn't pop in a little bit, so for me, the most common one, right, these days is like, I guess the imposter syndrome, right? Or like, you can't really do that. And so I feel like if I don't have at least a little bit of that, maybe my goals or dreams aren't big enough right now. So like I've come to recognize it a little bit as normal, because it's like trying to keep me in my comfort zone, which and I want to get out of that comfort zone. But yeah, the self-talk's been huge. And one of the things that has been most powerful for me is, as I've continued to do this kind of like deep work on myself, I've realized more and more that, at least for me, a lot of the negative thoughts come from like a wounded part of me. So I think about that thought of, you're not going to be able to do this, or, you're going to embarrass yourself, or people don't like you. You're not enough. When I get curious about that thought and really go inside and like, what part of me feels that way, or where is that thought coming from? I'm able to kind of trace it to find that thought is usually coming from this protective part of me that doesn't want me to do the thing or take the risk, because it's afraid this other wounded part of me is going to feel that embarrassment again. Yeah. And inevitably that wounded part comes from this childhood trauma place, or this place when, I was the new kid when we moved across the country, and it was really hard and I was really scared. And so when I can find which part of me is feeling that, now I can kind of help that wounded inner child. Right. So, there's a form of therapy that's gotten really popular over the last few years, and it's called internal family systems. But it's based on this idea that we have parts of us, right? And a common one are the different manifestations of these wounded kind of inner children, right? Yeah. That are scared or afraid, or didn't get, something that they needed at an important time in their development. So I try to help those wounded parts, and that's kind of the deeper trauma work. And then kind of on a more kind of practical day-to-day quick level, I very much protect the information and the kind of thought patterns and vibrations that I allow in this thing, because, right, so much of the culture, or the programming in the culture is toxic, right? Yeah. There can be some pushback around, sharing your dreams with your family or your friends. Like, to some people, they can't see, entrepreneurship or creating the life that you want as a realistic possibility for them. So they shoot that down. Right. So if I've got imposter syndrome, I'm not going to be hanging around people, that are afraid to take risks themselves or hate their jobs. Right. So part of it is like, absolutely just feeding my mind positive stuff, things like your podcast, things like, different stuff from inspirational people that have the life that I want. Right. Like, people that are successful. So yeah, those are kind of some of the things for me.
Makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I think, surrounding yourself with, positive influence is so important, like you were talking about, because, humans are just wired to mimic other people as a way to fit in and stay safe, kind of like you were talking about, like that part of our mind that just wants us to be safe. And that's why it's making those changes often can be hard, because it's can be scary going to something new that we never tried before, or, we got that imposter syndrome and we don't think we are able to do it. So we tell ourselves, no, we can't do it, play small and fit in with everyone else, because that's how you can stay safe and, not make anyone upset or not embarrass yourself or whatever. Right. Yeah, I've done that countless times in my life. So I definitely understand that. And I think many people can relate with that as well. So yeah, it's great that you shared that. And I've really loved your story so far. Being able to hear, where you've come from and kind of where you are now. And how you've been able to implement, all the great, amazing things you've learned in your life for yourself, but not only for your kids as well, and then be able to share it with other people. I think a lot of people, don't think about it this way, but like once you heal yourself, I think it's pretty important to go out and help other people as well. Heal them as well, because it's like one of the greatest feelings I think I've ever felt as well, being able to share that change that you've experienced with other people and to help them
Mhm.
overcome the same thing. And I think
Mhm.
society is desperately needing that right now. So it's fantastic that you're helping people overcome their trauma, because that is such an important integral part of overcoming self-sabotage, or just being able to move forward in life and overcome those changes. So if if someone is interested in working with you, I know you said you're pretty busy right now and you kind of have like the clients you are set with. Do you work over the internet? Are you accepting more clients? Where can they find you if you are?
Yeah, right now I'm not accepting new clients right now. If there's a listener that happens to be in the state of North Carolina, and is looking for some help around some of this stuff, that they may be able to, it'd be worth emailing me, Steve at rapidrecoverycounseling.com. Yeah, they could email me, but only if they're in the state of North Carolina. I'm kind of focusing on my practice right now, not
Right.
doing a lot of coaching. I've got some interesting stuff in the works, that hopefully I'll be able to announce down the line here. But yeah, for now, they could shoot me an email though. I'd be happy to answer any questions about trauma, or someone that's looking for resources. Like if you're looking for a coach or a practitioner to focus specifically on that, I'd be happy to connect people.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, I'll put your email in the description of the podcast and the video below, so other people can contact you if need be. But yeah,
Perfect.
just thank you so much for sharing your story and taking your time to come on, and from your weekend getaway at the lake,
Yeah,
and
my
uh
pleasure.
and on 4th of July, no less. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And it's been, I think, these stories are so powerful for other people, but I think every time I hear a different story, I just kind of opens up something new inside me, because they're such powerful stories, and they're so relatable. And
Yeah,
I'm able to take away something from it as well. So
right on. Well, thanks for having me. It's been great.
hey, awesome. Thank you, Steve.